Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about LGA vs PGA, also known as Land Grid Array and Pin Grid Array. Also don't forget to like and subscribe if you like all things techie. With news of the new AM5 platform from AMD going to LGA over their long history of using PGA, I think it's important that people understand the differences between them so no one is misinformed about either one. First, let's get one myth out of the way. LGA is not faster than PGA, or vice versa. Both platforms still require a connection to the motherboard. LGA needs pins on the board and PGA needs land grid arrays on the board. So no matter what you do, both still require both at the same time. I have no idea where this myth came from or if it's even a common one, but I do hear about it every once in a while and it's just flat out false. Now back to what the video is actually about. LGA or land grid array is a type of connector that uses flat contacts on the CPU that is then mounted to a socket that has pins. This connector is, or was, only used by Intel for many years since 2004. AMD has used LGA once in the past with their Athlon 64FX and currently only use it for the Threadripper, but if I'm being honest, Threadripper is more of a service CPU than a consumer one. The benefits of LGA over PGA is that it's way more durable for the CPU since it's flat and has no pins, it makes the CPU more compact, and it will never get ripped out of its socket because it got stuck to your cooler. The cons for LGA is that you need to be more careful installing the CPU because if you don't, you will drop it and end up damaging motherboard pins, which can be quite annoying since it's very difficult to bend back the pins without snapping them off. And if they do snap off, you might need to buy a new motherboard. However, I would much rather replace a motherboard than a CPU, personally. PGA or Pin Grid Array is a type of connector that uses pin contacts on the CPU that is then mounted to a socket that uses flat connectors on the inside of the socket. This type has been used since the late 80s and was used with Intel until 2004. And is still used now by AMD. The benefits of PGA is that it's easier to fix bent pins than on an LGA motherboard. It's also easier to install as the pins are usually pretty rigid unless you slam dunk the CPU into the motherboard, and the motherboard socket is pretty impossible to damage. Now for the cons. It is more costly if you snap a pin off, especially if it's a higher end CPU. It's also less secure in the socket since it doesn't really have a retainer lid to hold the CPU in place, unlike LGA which does, which can lead to ripping the CPU out of its socket if it's stuck to your cooler. Both have their advantages and disadvantages. However, should you pick a CPU on just the type of array it uses? No. Once it's put together all carefully and correctly like you should be doing, it doesn't matter. As I mentioned before, one does not perform better than the other at all. It's just different ways of achieving the same goal for us, the consumer, easily being able to swap CPUs around to our liking. So why is this topic relevant right now, and why did I make this video that tells people the pros and cons of each one? Well, AMD has made the jump to LGA from their long history of using PGA. Although there has been no official confirmation or information on this, the number one reason I can think of as to why they've made this change is that they will have less returns and complaints of bent or snapped pins, leaving only dead on arrival or defective CPUs for returns and warranty claims. Going to LGA will also move most of the pin problems onto the motherboard makers, which I'm sure they will love. In conclusion, it doesn't really matter unless you're the company that makes the CPUs. All the talk about one being better than the other is all topical and very opinion based, which soon won't even matter as there will be only one consumer array to pick, and that is Land Grid Array. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.